Welcome back to the Unstuck Movement. This platform is for you to break the chains that are holding you back in your life. I'm your host, Rob Z. Today we have the incredible Jay Abbasi with us on the platform. Jay, I like to jump into a question right away so we can get right to the heart of the matter. And I'd love to know about breakthrough. What for you is one habit or one routine that you implemented into your life that has led to the biggest breakthroughs for you in your career and in your personal life?
Yeah, this is an easy one for me. It's meditation. And the reason why is because, well, when I first learned about meditation years ago, I was a very big skeptic. And I was like, this stuff's not for me. And when I started to practice it, I realized how much clarity it was giving me to be able to get out of my own head and to not be so immersed in my day to day and just all the thoughts and the fears and the emotions that were disrupting me, to be able to look above the clouds, if you will, and see a vision of what it is that I really wanted to achieve in my life, in my career, the kind of impact that I wanted to make. And I feel like I wouldn't have been able to get that clarity if it weren't for the regular practice of meditation.
I love that. I know exactly what you're talking about and exactly how it brings that clarity into your life. I want to share something with you, but at first I want to introduce everybody to the show. So the Unstuck Movement, true testimonies of breakthrough. So these episodes are for you to find the perseverance, the faith, the strength, the boldness that you need to find those breakthroughs from those things that have been holding you back in your life. I want to thank the Connected Leaders Academy for being the sponsor for the show. Check out connectedleadersacademy.com. Now, Jay overcame personal challenges, including his father's passing, to become a successful leader and coach, helping others navigate career growth without experiencing that burnout. The overwhelm, the burnout in life is something that we all experience, and finding ways to mitigate that, finding ways to get around that and get past that is everything for us to feel that true success and joy and fulfillment that we want to have. And, you know, you're talking about meditation. I had this epiphany one time. I was on an airplane and it was really cloudy and rainy that day. And we were taking off. And as we took off and got above the clouds where the rain was, the sun was shining because it was like early morning. And it hit me. And I remember back then I wrote a social media post all about it because I wrote while I was on the plane about it for a while. Like these clouds in our mind, the cloudiness that we experience, the confusion, and it's blocking that true light from shining down and giving us what we need, right? The sun is always there. The clear sky is always there, but it's usually blocked out, or at least kind of overcast by the clouds and the storms in our mind. And meditation is one of those habits we can put into our life that helps us to get rid of the clouds and build that clarity. How did that process work for you? How did you first start meditating? Like you said, skeptical in the beginning. You got to sit down with yourself for a while. What was the beginning of that process like?
Yeah. By the way, that's a wonderful story. And what started for me was reading about personal development and learning from other thought leaders. They kept bringing up this practice, and over again, they were saying how valuable it was for them. And so I said, okay, fine. Let me give it a shot, because I'm a believer in, if I can experience something and it does prove to be of value, then I'm gonna keep doing it. But I'm not gonna go by what other people say. I'm gonna have to experience it myself. So, having heard about it, I finally gave it a try. And then I just started to expand and explore more and more and deepen my practice. And the way you described it was perfect, Rob. I mean, it's that sun is always shining. Another way I oftentimes refer to it is the insights, the clarity, it's always available to you. The question is, are you available to it? And to make ourselves available to it, we need to be able to pause and be able to observe what's going on within us objectively, without judgment, with a great deal of kindness and compassion towards ourselves. And when we do that, the clouds start to part naturally. And so it not only has it helped me with clarity and vision, but also just to be more effective in managing through disruptive emotions. Because when, the title of this podcast, right, the Unstuck Movement, when we get stuck, it's because we are stuck in our own emotional reactions.
Mm.
It's because we're stuck in our own world of what we're immersed in. There isn't actual any physical reality of what's keeping us stuck. There isn't a boulder on our chest. You know what I mean? It's in our minds and in our bodies. So if we can learn how to navigate that inner world effectively, which I think meditation is the perfect mechanism to be able to do that, then it frees ourselves from ever feeling stuck.
Do you ever find yourself, because this is the journey that I've been on, is sometimes the things that I'm experiencing seem to be impossible to shake in meditation. It's like, wow, this is like almost too intense. I could sit here for an hour and it's still kind of like hanging on. Have you experienced that, or does it seem to like you can kick it all out at some point in time?
I've absolutely experienced that, Rob. And the reality is there are some disruptions that they linger a bit longer than others. And I think there's value to recognizing that there's opportunity there for growth. So in other words, if you really feel triggered and gripped by something, then what that means is there was a lot of attachment. There was a lot of attachment there. So explore that. Wow, what really gripped me? Like, for example, for me, Rob, people pleasing was one of my big tendencies. And I realized that in meditation, that was the one when I felt I let someone down. I felt someone of an authority might have a bad perception of me.
Mm-hmm.
It would grip me like crazy. And I realized that's a big attachment. So if anything, it's a huge learning experience. So going into it, not so I can get rid of it, right? That's where it becomes a problem. If I'm going into the meditation so I can get rid of the disruption, then I'm going about it the wrong way. I'm actually going into it to explore and understand and gain insights from the way my mind and body reacted to a situation.
Yeah, and you might be watching this or listening and asking yourself, like, how do I know if something grips me? Well, is it on a mental loop? Is that thing replaying on a loop and you can't seem to shut it off? And you want to shut it off, but it just keeps replaying itself. And it's what drives people to insanity, those loops. It's what can completely change who we are, what loops we live on, or if we're able to just like release those loops in general, good or bad, like letting those things go. And, I think there's been also a part for me that's been very beneficial in understanding when I go into the service of other people. Now, exercise does this. Obviously, back in the day, I had very bad coping habits in this way, which were drugs and alcohol got me out of those loops, got me to stop thinking about those things, but really just buried them and covered them up, didn't actually get rid of them. But when I go in service for other people and I'm helping other people, or just turn my attention to like, okay, how am I going to like take this thing that I'm going through right now? And I love the concept of making your mess your message. If I can take this mess that I'm experiencing, what's the message behind it? What's the blessing behind it? If I can help somebody on their path with that, it takes me out of thinking about me. And when I'm thinking about me less, man, I am so much better. I'm so much more healthy. When I'm helping other people, I'm so much more healthy. For you, as you've gone on this journey, I'm really curious. How many years ago did you first start meditating? How long has it been?
It's been over 10 years now. I don't know the exact date, but about a decade now.
What did you what did you start to notice over time? What started to form differently in your life? What things started to change? Because I know when you first begin the practice, subtle things change that you don't notice, but then big things start to change. What did you notice started to shift in your life?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that I don't get nearly as bothered by the perspectives that I think other people have of me. So in other words, I used to be, and I referred to people pleasing earlier, I used to have it was like a very sensitive reaction to what other people would say about me or what I think they thought of me. And I was starting to realize that it wouldn't grip me anymore as much anymore. I wouldn't feel that fear as much. It would come up, but it would dissipate a lot quicker. So I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind. The second thing is I found that I had more space to respond versus just to react emotionally to anything that didn't go my way. So I think that's a very powerful thing that this practice has given me. And also, Rob, this one I've noticed, especially when I made transitions in my life, whether that's, when I left corporate or in business decisions as an entrepreneur, I have much better ability to recognize my intuition. I can feel my intuition. It comes up so much clearer for me today than it might have 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Leaving the space and the gap, that's where all of that breakthrough comes from, right? And our ego, because I think, when we're talking about meditation, we're talking about like this, our ego is constantly trying to consume, and it's never slowing down, it's never stopping, and it never has enough. And meditation builds that space in. What does love enjoy? Love enjoys space to move, space to breathe, space to create, because we were made to be creators. And it's really hard to create when you're on the hamster wheel. You're never slowing down, you're never stopping. And like you said, when you have room to breathe, then your intuition, you can finally like hear it. You can finally like, oh, wow, I never knew that was there. Like you said, it's there the whole time, but you don't even know that it's there because you can't stop and slow down enough to understand how to access it. It's really quite incredible.
It really is. And what you just described there reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. What meditation offers is a space that wasn't available earlier because you were just between stimulus and just response. It was like this, right? There was no space in between. But now I feel over the years that space has just grown. Mm-hmm. And you said it really well before, which is maybe at first, the first, few months or year, it wasn't as noticeable, but over a longer period of time, it's become more and more noticeable.
And what a great book. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, to learn from somebody who was in he was in Auschwitz, right? He was in the major concentration camp during the Holocaust. And for him to have that breakthrough from that experience, that's kind of the concept behind this platform, is making your mess your message. How do you turn something terrible in your life into a message you help other people with? That's everything. And for you, one of those big things was the passing of your father, which built up resiliency inside of you. How have you taken that journey over the past decade and made that a message instead of a mess in your life?
Yeah. Well, at the time when it happened, I wasn't in a great place in my life. I was working at the time, but the job was not a very fulfilling job. There wasn't any plan as to where I was going to go next. And things in my life, relationships were not going the way I would have liked them to go. Physically, I wasn't in a great place. I wasn't the healthiest version of me. And after my father passed away, it really forced me to ask those deeper questions. And I guess my mortality really came to my face. Like, there was no way for me to hide from that anymore. How much time do I have left? What am I doing with this time? How am I serving the world? What am I giving? What am I doing here? How do I build a life of happiness and fulfillment and impact and still be able to feel like I'm effectively providing for my daughter, my family, right? Because those are the two things that we oftentimes think could be binary. Either like, I'm at peace, I'm not burning myself out, or I'm working like crazy and I'm burning myself out. I wanted to bridge that gap. I wanted to be able to have both, be able to say I could achieve a great deal and be at peace. So that, in a way, was how I took what was my mess and it then became my message.
Yeah. How do you find that balance? Achieving so much and not burning yourself out. How do you help people do that?
I think the key word, Rob, for that is detachment. I found that the reason why we can fall into a great deal of resistance is because we've attached our happiness or even our identity to achieving a certain goal or getting rid of something we think is not is in the way. So that's a version of some sort. And as long as we keep doing that, where we keep reaching for something, believing that that is the thing that's going to make us whole, we are creating more and more resistance because we're in a state of lack in that moment. So the practice is to be able to be present and to continue to pursue things, but not under the false belief that the fulfillment of that desire is going to make you happy. Because every time you're seeking happiness, you're not happy. Every time you say happiness is over there, it's not here. So we have to shift our mindset around this and be able to recognize that happiness, peace, the light that you were talking about, the sun shining above the clouds, it's here right now. And then the rest ends up being, how do I want to celebrate my happiness? How do I want to serve the world? And I can pursue that with passion, but without telling myself, it's only when I get there that I'm going to be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you find that balance, and how do you walk that path with conviction? How do you walk it with grace? Is a really challenging day-to-day thing to be able to do. And I think for a lot of people, they don't really ever figure that out, or you spend a lifetime trying to master it. And every day, if your intentions are right, you're going to get one step closer and bring yourself closer to that. So we got to jump into, we're going to ask just for 1 minute, 60 seconds, to the Connected Leaders Academy is going to get a shout out. They are the sponsor of this show. When we come back, I want to find out what this statement means to you. One of the statements that you had sent to me leading up to this episode was, what does this moment require of me? What a great question to ask. And I want to know what that means to you and how we can apply that to our lives. We'll talk about that in 60 seconds.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world, globally, all across the country, high performers, titans of industry. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, this is where you want to be. Join the Connected Leaders Academy today. We are scaling massively. We want to welcome you in. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JAESCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
So Jay, what does that mean? What does this moment require of me? What does that question mean to you?
So it's a way to interrupt a pattern. If the pattern that you're going into is one where you are thinking about future scenarios and getting caught in those worries, overthinking about what could happen, or even feeling overwhelmed by the amount of things that you have on your to-do list, that's one thing that could be a reason why this question is valuable. The second thing could be if you're caught in thinking about something that happened in the past and you're ruminating about that and it just feels like you can't get out of it. That question forces you out of thinking about the past, thinking about the future, and into the present. What does this moment require of me? Helps you to realize that whatever it would be on that to-do list, you can't do it all at one time anyway. You can only do it one task at a time, one moment at a time. There's no other way to achieve. It is only one step at a time. So that question forces you to come back to the present moment and get into action. And something, Rob, that you said earlier, I want to just highlight because I think you said it really well. It also could help you to be able to get out of your own self-absorption and just thinking about me, into not only what does this moment require of me, but what do the people around me need of me right now, is another way in which that question can bring you to service versus self-absorption.
Yeah, Jay, that's really true. That's really interesting, isn't it? Like, when we're trapped in a situation, and I mean trapped like in ourselves in a situation, when we're around other people, you can completely flip that to get outside of yourself. How can I be of service? Who needs me here? Who am I being called to be? And you said about people pleasing earlier, and that was a big difficult thing for you and for me also, like just feeling like you've got to please everybody, which is impossible. And that can really it can really turn you inward. Trying to please everybody all the time can turn into you constantly evaluating yourself. Like, is everybody okay with me? Am I making anybody upset? Instead of flipping that around, like, how can I make these people happy? What can I show up and do? Who can I be in the situation that is going to benefit everybody? You said something earlier that really made me think of this theme that I hear again and again and again. And that theme is, when I'm not doing, who am I being? And so many people are attached. They've attached their whole entire persona throughout their life to what they're doing. And as long as they're doing the things and their identity is good, but when they're not doing and they're just being, they have no idea who they actually are. Who are you whenever you're just being compared to when you're doing?
It's a deep question. I like it. I am presence, awareness, consciousness. I don't know how else to describe it, but I'm just here. And I am also connected to everyone and everything around me. And as someone, or when we detach ourselves from what we do, then the identity of who we are and what we're here to do can become a lot clearer for us. So for me, it's hard to describe that. Some people would get into some aspects of spirituality and religion, which is a wonderful thing, right? I think that most of us have that within us as to who we really are and what it is that we're really here to do. And I do think that we should tap into that power, leverage that power as much as possible. Because when we do, we are not so self-absorbed in ego attachments of, I am this job, or I am this position, or I make this much money. And if I don't make this much money, I'm no longer, this idea that I have in my head of who I am. Because any idea that you have in your head is just a concept, but who you are, that's the greatest question of all. And I find that it's a lifelong learning process to be able to continue to ask yourself that question, to be able to really know what's beyond just the concepts and the attachments.
I asked you that question knowing for myself, like if somebody asked me that question, I'd be like, oh, shoot, that's a really hard question to answer. But I love to think about it because, man, if I'm just being, what does that even mean? Like if I'm just being here, right? Because we're always doing stuff. So when we're just being, and you said, like, just going back to the concept of meditation, like observing your thoughts, when you're observing your thoughts and you're like literally in that moment, you're just being, because you're just sitting there. You're not doing anything. You're just like taking a look at the inventory of what is my mind doing. And then when you're doing that, you're like, what the heck's going on in here? Inside of here, it's so confusing to see. Like, I can't believe this is me. It doesn't even make any sense. These thoughts are coming out of nowhere. They're coming, and they don't. Some of them don't connect. Some of them don't intersect. What are you going to say? Go ahead.
I love what you're saying there, because it's watching this machine, this mechanism work, and realizing that it isn't like I'm behind this machine pulling on these levers and that creates this thought, this creates that thought. When you watch it closely, thoughts just appear. They appear, and without much rhyme or reason. Mm-hmm. When you can do that, when you can observe that, it becomes self-evident that, well, if this thought is not something that's my creation, I didn't decide on this thought, then I'm clearly not my thought. I'm clearly not the thought. How can I be that which I didn't create and that which I can also observe? I can't be that which I observe. So if that becomes very clear to you, then you might get curious as to, okay, then who's the one observing? And that's when you just get into being. And anyone who experiences this, and I oftentimes work with my clients to help them to get there, they always say the same thing, that it's so peaceful, it's so beautiful, it's so loving, it's where creativity comes from, where possibility comes from. And it's something that I encourage people to tap into daily, because it's where you are going to have to revisit over and over again when you do feel disruption. If you can keep going back to that place, well, that really helps you to build up resilience in a world that's going to always have a great deal of adversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where you put that resilience in to practice, to build it into your life on a continuous basis, so that when you leave that place of meditation, and for me, it's meditation and it's prayer combined together, and I'd love to be able to say I stand up and I walk that way, right? Because when you're in that place, it can be such a peaceful place, and you can lose it 4 seconds later. Right. It's incredible. It's incredible how quickly we can lose it, and how quickly you can go down a rabbit trail. And this is the most, I had our thoughts explained to me one time like this, that you're sitting on the side of the road and you're watching traffic go by. And what we do is we'll lock onto a car and we'll follow that car like 20 miles down the road and just stay locked onto it. But why would you do that if you're watching traffic? You don't do that. You just watch the cars go by, and you don't really get attached to any of them. They're all just going by, doing what they do, and you're not a part of it. But we're constantly attaching ourselves to a car, because every car is a thought. We're attaching ourselves to that thought and riding it out to the nth degree. And also, it's interesting that this is where free will comes in. We have the ability to choose what we think. The thoughts, we might not be choosing when the thoughts pop in, but we can choose which ones to like embrace, and we can nurture those thoughts. And then that becomes the pattern in how we think and how we look at the world. How did you look at the world beforehand compared to how you look at it now 10 years later? Are there certain things that you let go of that you now grab a hold of? Whoop, my headphones fell off.
All good. And so I think before I consider myself riding on autopilot. And so the way you describe the cars, I love that analogy. I've heard it before too. And it's like just whatever the car that attracts the attention is pulling me, and that's just the way it is. And that's just life. And then the gradual path I took was then realizing, okay, well, I don't have to attach to that. But thinking at first, maybe, well, what do I have control over? What do I have control over? And I remember going through this practice and thinking, well, I want to be able to control my thoughts. I want to be able to control my feelings. And I realized that was a recipe for disaster as well, because you can't control your thoughts. You can't. That's like saying, I want to control the weather. Right? The weather is nature. It's just nature. So I realized that that's actually not the pathway. So discerning control from choice, the way you just described it, was a huge help for me. And then realizing it's not about control, it's about choice. And the choice is how I choose to relate to every thought and emotion that arises in my consciousness. Just the same way how you choose to relate to the weather. If I were to go outside and it was raining, I wouldn't look up into the sky and scream, "Stop raining right now. I don't want it to rain." Everybody would think that I'm a crazy person and want to put me in a home, right? But instead,
I have done that. I have yelled at the rain before.
Okay. So in that moment, you might have lost your sanity, and then
a little bit.
What am I doing? But the way to keep going with that analogy, the way we would want to do that is choose how we relate to the rain, which is we put the umbrella above our head so that we don't get soaking wet, and we accept the fact that it's raining. So the same way with every thought, with every emotion, just choose how you relate to it, and to realize that you don't have to believe every thought. You don't have to let every emotion fuel your decision. When you have that space, you can then choose whether this is something that is helpful or something that it's not helpful.
Mm-hmm. And putting that space in is the important part. If you don't have the space in, if there's no space for the choice, there's no thought in the choice. It's just like, well, we're just going for it. Wherever it's going, we're going. And I'm on the ride. And it's a very common place for people to be. But when you realize that there is a choice, boy, man, and it's interesting, isn't it? That every single day there's thousands of opportunities for you to put the pause in before you when you have the thought and before you latch on, there's so many opportunities to change that. And we probably, if we're aware of it, we probably catch ourselves maybe 10% of the time, because it's just, even in this conversation, hundreds of opportunities to put the pause in to make a different choice on what to think or what to say. It's really interesting when you break it down. So going into how this has formed your purpose, right? So you have more clarity, you give yourself more space to allow creativity to come into your life. Talk in the specifics, how that's created more of a purpose for you in your day-to-day life, in your professional life. What clarity did you receive that changed everything?
Yeah. Well, I started to do this work on myself, and I immediately felt some differences through the practices we're discussing here, and really getting a clear sense of what kind of impact I wanted to have in the world. And as I started to travel this path, I noticed so many people that were struggling. My time at Tesla, for example, I observed people burning themselves out, very well-intended people. They have great intentions, and they struggled quite a bit in how they managed that stress, that anxiety, and it, I don't know, it just a natural pull came of, I want to help these people. They need my help. I know I can help them because I've done this work on myself. I've seen the result. And I guess the natural progression for any of us is, once we learn something and we have this, we feel that we've been given this gift, we want to give it to the people that we encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became very clear to me that the mission that I'm on here is to be able to help people who have the ambition to want to really do something meaningful, to do something impactful, but they're not willing to do it at the sacrifice of their health and their well-being. They're not willing to do it and burn themselves out, that they want to be able to be happy, be at peace, and also have quality time with loved ones, and be able to have those experiences with the people who matter most in their lives, and not feel like when they're with them, they're just thinking about work or thinking about what they have to do next week and all of that, that they can be fully present. And so I guess the natural progression became, okay, starting to help people. And then it just started to attract more and more and more. And then being able to see the kind of results this has gotten for people, it just naturally grew from there.
What were some of the biggest lessons what did you do at Tesla, and what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from working at Tesla?
So my last role at Tesla, I was running the national training program for energy sales. So anybody from entry level up to around VP level were going through a lot of the training programs and coaching programs that I either designed or facilitated. So different topics: sales, leadership development, customer service, those kind of things. The valuable lessons I learned, one was how to be an effective coach. We had some incredible mentors and trainers there, and they walked us through methodologies that would enable me to be a really good coach and learn how to ask great questions, and through active listening, be able to really understand how to help someone to break free from a limitation, or really take action towards what was oftentimes an impossible goal that they would ask us to achieve at Tesla, but we'd somehow find a way to make it work. So that's one. Two, it really shaped my mind around considering any problem or any initiative from the perspective of what's the problem that we're looking to solve. So it's something that we learned called first principles thinking. And so if you, let's say, are tasked to for a certain deliverable, well, the first question to ask is, what is the problem that we're solving? And while that, of course, applies to business and thinking through strategy, but it also could apply to yourself. Like, what is the problem here that I'm looking to solve? So the clarity that you gain on understanding the problem helps you to then design the appropriate solution, versus trying to say, okay, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. Well, we first need to understand the problem. And the third thing I'd say that comes to my mind in terms of learnings from Tesla was how to effectively set boundaries. Because if I didn't, I would have never gone to my daughter's basketball games and never have seen her musicals, and I wouldn't have had time for myself. But my years at Tesla taught me that if I if I learn how to proactively set those boundaries and effectively communicate that to the people around me, then I can still achieve and grow within the company as I did, without sacrificing my own mental health.
Yeah, and the things that really matter to you. You mentioned the impossible goals, right? They give you the impossible goal, and somehow you guys reach them. And I see how working for a company with a leader like Elon Musk, who's, I mean, simply, he can't turn it off, it seems like. He's a nonstop flow of impossible goals and achieving them. I can see how that would bleed into everybody else in the company, and how those impossible goals you'd carry them with you everywhere you go. So even when you're not working, you're constantly thinking about it because the goal is so big and so grand, and you're constantly chasing these things. And this applies to every company, but I can see on a scale of a company like Tesla with a leader like Elon Musk, why that would be so much more apparent. The burnout, I could see why that would be so much more apparent. The overwhelm and the imbalance would be so much more there. So I imagine you saw this on an exacerbated kind of level, even compared to what most of the country see. Do you think that's true, or is there a lot of balance in Tesla?
I think the reality is, just like any other organization, the department that you work in would determine the amount of balance that you would get and how the leader of that department operated. And so I would, let's say I'd speak to a person in one sector of the business, and I could sense that they were very, very overwhelmed by the demand that was put on them. And then I'd speak to a leader in a different department, and they would not be feeling that way because of the demand on them and the way the leadership was working with them. So it always comes back to leadership, right, Rob? I mean, if you have a leader that is prioritizing work-life balance and ensuring that everyone is in a good mental and emotional state, and that's a priority to them, it will seep down into the rest of the department. And if you have one who doesn't, then it would have the opposite effect. So I saw both sides of it. And also it was seasonal, right? Because depending on the season that we were in, when we would get to the end of a quarter, for example, everyone knew it was all hands on deck. We had to make something happen. We had to deliver a certain amount of cars. So in those instances, that's where these practices came into play, which is to be able to navigate those environments effectively. But I found it to be a lot of fun. It would be a lot of collaborative effort. We'd have to work together to solve these problems. And some of my favorite stories come from those times of high demand and high pressure.
Really interesting. And I love just to hear some of like the insight about Tesla and what it's like to work there, and really cool stuff, man. I love this journey that you're on. And a question came to me as we come to the close of this episode. A question came to me that I've never asked before, that I think I'm going to ask from now on, but I want to ask you this question. What is something that surprises you about yourself?
What surprises me about myself is how, even though I've worked on certain tendencies for so many years, they still come up. Like we talked about people pleasing today, right, Rob? That still comes up, and I have to look at it and sometimes just laugh at the tendency of the fear of what someone thinks of me, or did I handle that the right way? Are they going to think poorly of me? And it's like, we've been down this road so many times. How I have to talk to myself in a kind way. And so I say that to hopefully encourage everyone who's listening to realize that the expectation we should have is not that one day every one of those tendencies is just going to be gone and you're going to be perfect and you're not going to have any fears and everything's going to be wonderful. You're never going to have any disruption. That is the wrong expectation. The appropriate, healthy expectation is that I'm going to be much more aware of these tendencies. They are not going to grip me nearly as much as they have in the past. And I'm going to be able to choose my response more often than not. But it doesn't mean, Rob, that it's going to ever go away. It doesn't mean that you're going to be free from them. So yeah, that's a surprise that hits me over and over again daily that, oh my God, that again?
Right.
That's still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And as for me, like I'll pray about like, God, take this thing away. I don't want to do like people pleasing. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. Just take it from me. But that's like your cross to bear kind of thing, right? It's there to teach a lesson and to build. I always look at it like that's a wound. And as you heal that wound, it's stronger than any other part of your body because you've worked on it so much. And so I look at it in that respect. And then also the empathy you can have for other people towards it, and you can really speak to that thing because you know how painful it is, you know how annoying it is, and how it is really interesting, isn't it? Like these things come up over and over again. I've been dealing with this for 40 years and I'm still dealing with it, and there's a reason why I'm still dealing with it, right? I'm supposed to be dealing with it because there's a big lesson there. I think those things that don't go away, those are the biggest lessons for us to learn from. I love that, man. That's so good. So if people want to find you, they can go to jayabbasi.me. Am I saying your last name right?
You are.
Cool. The link is right there, jayabbasi.me. And they also can find you on LinkedIn, which is Jay Abbasi Consulting on LinkedIn. Very cool, man. Anything you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
Well, first, a thank you to you, Rob, for being such a good host and for facilitating such a good conversation. And for everyone who's listening, remember that I guess the most important lesson I oftentimes I want to impart to people is to not be hard on yourself. The most common thing I see in people that are struggling or feeling stuck or feeling like they're not where they want to be is that they're so self-critical and they're judging themselves and they're so harsh on themselves. But when we create that space, the way Rob, you and I talked about in this episode, is to do so with a great deal of kindness and compassion towards yourself, and to treat yourself like how you treat the people you love the most in the world.
Good stuff. I love that, brother. Jay, thank you so much for being a part of the Unstuck movement.
You got it. You're most welcome, Rob.